I am the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I'm going to ask, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Inspired by Suzuki Daisetz Teitaro's book, An Introduction to Zen Buddhism, published in 1934, I thought I would have a go at one of the practices of Zen, to contemplate on a koan, which in the spirit of Zen is slightly more to the point than a scholarly exercise would be. Suzuki explains, Koan literally means a public document or authoritative statute, a term coming into vogue towards the end of the Tang dynasty. It now denotes some anecdote of an ancient master or a dialogue between a master and monks, or a statement or question put forward by a teacher, all of which are used as the means for opening one's mind to the truth of Zen, to force the evolution of Zen consciousness in the minds of their disciples. The koan of one hand clapping is just one among many tales he relates in the book, but in the spirit of Zen, I want to seriously consider the question and see where it leads us. If clapping is an action made with two hands, then there is no clapping if there is only one hand in play. But let us nonetheless consider the one hand engaged in the motion of clapping without prejudging its outcome. I can think of several approaches to answering the question, though the point of the Zen koan is not so much to provide a definitive answer, but to break through our cognitive apparatus of thought to get to the space of no thought. My first approach is to take the question literally. Let us engage in clapping but with only one hand. Prima facie, there will be no sound. But is that actually true? As my single hand moves through the air, it feels the resistance of the air slipping between my fingers and caressing the side of my hand as it shifts to the back side of my palm. While I am clapping, I am sitting in my room, windows wide open with the mild light of a Singaporean morning illuminating the space. It is a cool morning, so I do not have the fan switched on the way I usually do. As my hand whooshes through the air, I at first seemingly hear nothing, but since I am searching for the sound of one hand clapping, I listen closer. My head remains the usual distance from my palm with my body seated in my chair, so my ears remain the same distance from my hand. I close my eyes. I shift my attention so as to really listen. I hear birds chirping outside my window. There are at least two different species of birds, one making a single chirp continuously, while another is making two chirps. The latter's emphasis is on the first chirp, while its second is a shorter chirp. An alarm goes off in some neighboring apartment, then it halts. A third bird chimes in, yet another species, and then a fourth, this time a crow, which voice is not as sonorous as the others. I hear some muffled voices, followed by a child crying out loud and then speaking to his carer. There is a distant rumble of traffic, perhaps a motorcycle going by on the nearby road. If I shut my windows, all those sounds are reduced. Now when I listen closely, I can even hear the air washing my hand as it moves through the air. So the sound of one hand clapping is not silence, but instead is all the other sounds around me and my hand. Those sounds are actually not so different from the sound of both hands clapping, but with the hands halted the instant before they contact each other. It is almost the same sound. The sound of the two hands moving together just prior to their contact is also part of the sound of clapping, if we consider that clapping is not just the instantaneous impulse upon contact, but the entire motion from the raising of the arms, the movements of the palms towards each other, their contact, and then their separation. The sound of one hand clapping is almost the same sound, less the contact. It has the same sounds from initiation, then the arms moving together to the infinitesimal separation of the palms just prior to contact. Then it is the same sound as the arms move apart and finally to the side as the clapping motion is completed. Avant-garde music composer John Cage captured this idea with his composition 433. Actually, I have not seen the score. Using my rudimentary music knowledge, I imagine it to be pages of empty 5-line staffs, perhaps each staff with a treble clef and each bar with just a single semi-brief rest symbol. At the top of the page is the title 433 and a tempo such that if played out, it would last that eponymous duration of 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Or maybe the page only has a paragraph with instructions to sit quietly in front of an instrument for 4 minutes and 33 seconds, poised to commence play but not actually commencing. In any case, how it is performed is that a musician will sit in front of her instrument with the score in front of her and then play the piece the way she does with any other piece of music. Is she really performing if nothing is heard? But isn't she? Is not a performer walking onto the stage to the audience's applause, perhaps making a brief bow before taking her position, or not part of her performance? These moments may not be the main part of the performance, not the part we paid to come see, but I think it is a part nonetheless. Where 433 differs from other pieces of music is that the audience will hear nothing. Or rather, they will hear what is not so different from the sound of one hand clapping, or the sound of two hands clapping but halted the instant before the palms contact. They will hear perhaps a distant cough. Maybe if they are really near the stage and the hall is very quiet, they hear the sound of her turning the pages of the score as the piece continues, if indeed it has several pages. They will certainly hear something, just not the tones of an instrument. Is this music? Is the sound of one hand clapping a sound? If you think it is not music, why? Are you not merely prejudiced, privileging in a piece of music its notes over the silence and rest in between the notes? If there was no silence, no rest, would you not hear a continuous barrage of notes? It need not be unpleasant, like the sound of an organ with no gaps between the notes, or what is known as legato, where the notes connect up seamlessly. A usual score, say one composed by Mozart, however, will occasionally have rest written in. Between movements, there is also a pause, a space for everyone, audience and musicians alike, to take a collective breath before the conductor rouses the orchestra again. Some composers like Felix Mendelssohn and Robert Schumann, so fearful that the silence between movements is broken by applause, deliberately compose music in the space between movements just to preclude that possibility. Audiences have learned to refrain, though that piece is still often filled with a festival of coughing. Better then than during the performance proper. In any case, Claude Debussy had explained that music is the space between the notes. That space, the pause, is as important as the notes. It is not an unwanted side effect, but it is instrumental to the effect of the music. It may not be entirely silent, filled with the overtones of the instrument still carrying on through the air. It may, however, be silent if held long enough, like the fermata on a crotchet rest at the end of a piece, such as Enrique Granado's Vals Poetico, No. 6. Music needs the silence just like numbers need the zero. So that is one possible approach, where the silence is not truly silent, but filled with the sounds of the hand whooshing, the sounds from without, such as birds, or simply the ambient sounds from the movement of the air. We can eliminate all those, but even in an anechoic chamber, where all external sounds, including the ambient sound, is minimized, we will still hear the sound of our ears' tinnitus, or if we are fortunate enough not to have that condition, the sound of the blood moving in our veins and arteries. A more familiar example comes from our sense of sight. We go stargazing, but it is a cloudy night. When we arrive back, Mother asks, "So what do you see?" We say, "We saw nothing," but that of course is not true. We may not have seen the stars we were hoping to see, but we certainly did not see nothing. We saw the clouds, the silhouette of the mountains in the distance, the grass on the ground, the trees, each other, the car. We just did not see what we were expecting to see, just like the audience at that performance of 433 heard something, just not the musical tones they were expecting to hear. Among our five senses, there are three which we cannot consciously turn off. We can mostly reduce the stimuli from our sense of sight and taste. Shutting our eyes in a dark space eliminates the visual stimuli. If we rinse our mouth with water and then close it, we will have little to no conscious stimuli from our sense of taste. However, we cannot shut our nose, ears, and skin the way we can our eyes and mouth, though the sense of smell can be ameliorated by having a neutral environment with no scent. Our sense of touch always feels something, since our skin is always in touch with something, usually our clothing and contact with surfaces, such as a chair or the ground. Even if we can somehow be suspended in the air, our skin is in contact with the air. A weightless vacuum will be able to remove this effect, but we cannot survive in such an environment without the help of support equipment such as oxygen tanks and protective clothing, which means our skin will be in contact with those. However, stillness desensitizes our sense of touch, as the continual tactile sensation of our clothing and contact with surfaces and the air falls to the background, and if no attention is paid to it, becomes unfelt. Finally, our hearing cannot be turned off consciously. Even if we stuff our ears with earplugs, we hear our breathing, and as mentioned, even if we control our environment, such as in an anechoic chamber, we continue to hear the blood coursing in our veins. Hence, the choice of the Koan to target the sense of sound is apt, since we can, to a large part, reduce the stimuli from our other four senses, but not our sense of hearing. This leads me to a second approach to take with the Zen Koan. It is also a literal approach, but in a different way, tantamount to asking, what is the sound of no hands clapping? In this second approach, we accept that the sound of one hand clapping is the same as that of no hands clapping. That is, it is the sound of silence, pure, simple, and absolute silence, and emptiness of sound, the same emptiness and silence of a vacuum. Most of us have never, when conscious, heard such a pure silence. Perhaps a person who is absolutely deaf, whose eardrum and cochlea is removed or completely not functioning, may experience this total silence. But for the rest of us, when we are conscious, our sensory apparatus is also active. Even in an environment that is quiet, we hear the ambient. Even in an anechoic chamber, we hear the blood coursing through our veins. However, lest we think that such silence and emptiness is impossible, it is not. We experience it daily in dreamless deep sleep. Dreamless because dreams can have sounds, and in shallow sleep, we can still hear sounds. However, there is a phase of sleep when the conscious part of our minds is at rest. It is then that we experience silence and emptiness. However, since sensations and thoughts only occur when we are conscious, this experience of silence and emptiness is ordinarily excluded from our conscious experience. In some way, it is somehow experienced since it happens to us, but it is not consciously experienced. There are at least 3 other scenarios where we may experience it, though whether those can be considered experiences are likewise questionable. They are when we are in a state of general anesthesia, in a coma, or are dead. The first 2 states may be comparable to deep dreamless sleep, perhaps even deeper than the deepest sleep, since one may be awakened from deep sleep but not from general anesthesia before it wears off, and not easily from a coma. As for death, since death is, in the words of Epicurus, a total deprivation of sensation, in that state we will ostensibly experience a total silence and emptiness. However, since death is a cessation of existence altogether, that is not just total silence, but a total lack of experience, since we need to exist in order to have any experience whatsoever. If there is any experience, it is the experience of a non-living thing, like a rock, a table, or as we are speaking of, a corpse. Do rocks or tables have experiences? There is no way to know, since we cannot interrogate either, and when we become like them in the form of a corpse, we have no consciousness to consider our experiences or lack thereof. As for our experience of pure silence and emptiness in dreamless deep sleep, can we properly be said to experience them if we are not conscious, since consciousness may be a necessary prerequisite for experience? How then do we even know that pure silence and emptiness is experienced at all in dreamless deep sleep? There are a few ways of knowing something, the most direct being a direct experience. I know I am in pain because I feel the pain. I know the color of the sky is blue because I see its blue color when I look at the sky. I know a train is passing by since I hear its whistle. However, my suggestion that deep silence and emptiness is experienced in dreamless deep sleep is not a result of direct experiential knowledge. There are also indirect ways of knowing things. My proposition is a result of a deduction that when we are unconscious, with no dreams and with no sensory stimuli being felt, what we are then left with is nothing. Thus, we know it is that way because of a deductive negation, which implies that after all conscious experience is subtracted, we must then be experiencing nothing. It is akin to initially possessing $10 and then having it taken away from me, after which I am left with no money. I cannot see $0, but I know I have none because of this same deductive negation. While I cannot see the $0, there is an effect that comes with having no money, such as misery or sadness, which tells me that I am undergoing an experience of having no money. However, this example has a vital difference with the silence and emptiness of dreamless deep sleep. My knowledge of having no money is cognized. My cognitive apparatus is at work, which makes the experience a conscious one. In dreamless deep sleep, consciousness itself is inactive. Yet, if it comes with effects, then these effects must have a cause. Such effects could be waking well rested, calm and energized, in contrast to having vivid dreams such as nightmares, which could leave one feeling drained and anxious upon awaking. However, it may be harder to attribute these effects to the experience of nothingness, since they may also be a result of the sleep itself. It may also be that there had been a genuine experience which leaves behind effects but not memories, the same way a surgery under general anesthesia may leave behind stitches. Can this experience of nothingness then qualify as an experience if experiences require consciousness? If there is no consciousness but something is happening to the person, does that mean that there is no experience? It seems that to experience this nothingness must require a person to be awake, conscious, and yet this person has to put aside any sensory stimuli he is undergoing and any thoughts. He has to be submerged and yet not articulate this submergence in his thoughts. He has to just be. This combination of being conscious while reducing sensory stimuli and thoughts can be achieved through meditative practices. Some forms of meditation focus on an object such as a religious symbol, a flower, or even a reflective disc. Some focus on aspects of one's body such as one's breathing or body part. The Rinzai school of Zen focuses on koans, while the Soto school's version of Zazen is simply sitting, focusing on nothing in particular, allowing all thoughts to evaporate in order to achieve a mental state of blankness. If this is possible, then silence and emptiness is a genuine experience, with its sound similar to the sound from one hand or no hands clapping. Let us once again consider the koan. What is the sound of one hand clapping? The question seems to presuppose a hearer of the sound. In the first approach, the hearer hears many sounds, though none of those sounds is a clap. In the second approach, the hearer hears what exactly? If no sound is heard, did a clap in fact occur? This could be the basis for a third approach, which is to deny that the question is a proper one. In asking what the sound is, it already leads the answerer to accept that there was indeed a sound to begin with, and now the answerer has to describe that sound in order to answer the question. It is not that the person heard the sound of silence. It is that there was no sound that results from one hand clapping. To even speak of clapping is likewise illegitimate, since having only one hand precludes the possibility for clapping, which then implies that no sound can result, since no clapping can take place. In my earlier example of the person with $10, the example presumes that she had $10 to begin with. If she did not have that $10, then there was no $10 to be taken away from her. She thus did not have the $10 to lose that led to her experience of having no money. She had no such experience since there was no loss to speak of. This third approach denies the intelligibility of the question by undermining its implicit assumptions. It is like asking what the hand of a snake looks like or what the person who is completely deaf hears. The person who does not have a eardrum and cochlea does not hear nothing. Instead, hearing is not among the possibilities for this person. The hand of a snake does not look like nothing. Instead, it does not look like anything, since snakes simply do not have hands. The above-mentioned rock, table, or corpse are not having an experience of emptiness. They are instead having no experience whatsoever, since experience is not within the realm of possibilities for a non-conscious object. To ask a question which presumes a possibility when there is no such possibility invalidates the question. A fourth approach leverages the same strategy as the previous one, questioning the premises implicit in the koan, but with a different twist. If there is no self to begin with, to whom then belongs the hand and who is hearing the sound? Huineng, who founded Zen in the 7th century, composed a poem. The Bodhi, or true wisdom, is not like the tree. The mirror bright is nowhere shining. There is nothing from the first. Where does the dust itself collect? Buddhist doctrines describes 5 aggregates of form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness that we misunderstand to be selves. A vital breakthrough for the practitioner is to realize that each of the aggregates is impermanent, changing and transient, and thus is in fact nothing. So if there is no self to begin with, who then is there to hear the sound of one hand clapping? It goes beyond idealism, where there remains selves cognizing the world, though the world does not exist beyond the thought constructions of the various selves. The Buddhist realization is that even our consciousnesses are of no import, since their temporal existences are ephemeral. There is no hand, no clap, no hearer, and no sound to be heard. This leads to the 5th approach, which discards the question altogether. Following from the 4th approach, if the answerer abides with the doctrine of the impermanence of the self, this koan and all other questions and their answers are inconsequential. But even a person who knows nothing about Buddhism can also adopt this approach, which is to rubbish the koan altogether, going beyond the 3rd approach, which questions the koan's intelligibility. In the 5th approach, the answerer reprimands the questioner for belly gazing, asking questions that are of no relevance to the demands of practical life. How does it matter what the sound is if there is even one? Whatever answer we come to makes no difference to what we do and how we should live, rendering it futile, just a squandering of time and energy. I have outlined 5 possible approaches, which may be the stages which a person pondering the koan may experience. Not necessarily in the order presented, though my sequence is a possible dialectical development. My list is not meant to be exhaustive, and there may be other approaches which I have not considered or may not even be able to imagine. On first considering the koan, one may try to carry out the clapping of one hand, either as a thought experiment or for real. Especially in the latter, but also in the former, they will then strain to hear whatever sound results. Hearing almost nothing from the hand, they instead hear other sounds. Hence, they have become sensitized to the sounds in their environment which they normally do not notice, such as the sound of the air conditioning or birds. As they continue to ponder the koan, they may then take a limits approach. What if the environment is controlled such that any background sounds are eliminated? They may then realize that the sound of one hand clapping is the same sound as the sound of no hands clapping, which is the same sound of a vacuum, which is silence. Yet, what does silence sound like? Does silence even have a sound? And if so, how can we hear it? Meditation is one way where the meditator sits in a quiet place removed from potential distractions for an extended duration. Having reduced the stimuli from her five senses, she then attempts to also quieten her mind. What she experiences then may be, or at least is close to, the experience of silence and emptiness. She has to be careful not to let thoughts intrude, not to even think about how she is trying to quieten her mind, but to instead simply be. The remaining approaches adopt a common strategy to destabilize the question, but in various ways. The third approach concludes that the question is illegitimate, since to clap requires two hands. The fourth approach is more learned, bringing in the Buddhist teaching of anatta or no self. If there isn't a self, then there is no sound, since there is no one to hear a sound if there is indeed a sound. So the sound of one hand clapping, or for that matter two hands, is moot. The fifth approach may result from frustration if the answerer can come to no proper answer, or after having taken the journey through the first four approaches, come to realize the futility of such questioning. For that matter, on a different day, with a different frame of mind, the same answerer may respond differently. There is no right answer, and the various approaches are not necessarily mutually exclusive. The point of posing a koan is not to come up with some definitively correct answer, since there may be none. It is for the student of Zen to struggle with it and finally come to a way to let go of it altogether. Koans may seem anti-intellectual since they provoke a destabilization of language and our usual way of understanding. It is precisely because our intellect plays such a major role in our self-understanding that koans seek to weaponize the intellect against itself by posing paradoxes to bring us to a higher state of realization, what Suzuki calls higher affirmation. Koans are just one tool in the Zen toolbox. Some tales from the Zen literature involve masters striking their students in response to serious questions from the students such as, what is the fundamental principle of Buddhism? The shock from the blow is meant to lead the student to awaken or satori. It is not that one hand clapping has or has not a sound, just like it is not the blow that brings enlightenment. It is about creating a state of readiness, to train and discipline the mind to be ready to awaken. To be able to sit and contemplate the sound of one hand clapping, one needs to bring oneself into a suitable frame of mind by removing actual and potential distractions in order to be able to focus properly on the koan. It then requires that person to be able to sit quietly with her thoughts, to let her thoughts bring her wherever they may go. It requires her to be able to adopt different approaches while still remaining focused. It requires her to bring herself back, to return to the demands of daily life, such as to carry out the menial tasks of cleaning, farming, begging, cooking, and serving. The monastic life for Zen monks is not just sitting zazen in meditation halls. As Pai Chang teaches, a day of no work is a day of no eating. Precisely because the tasks are menial, They are an important part of the training for the monks in order to foster a character of humility and service. They serve a practical function, but also a spiritual function, to develop the characters of the mendicants. Ultimately, the point of the koan is not to know definitively what the sound of one hand clapping is. Indeed, if we arrive at a definitive answer, the koan will no longer be suitable as a koan, since it will no longer serve its function of requiring the deep contemplation of the disciple. This, however, does not mean that there are no answers whatsoever. There are possible answers, as I have myself discovered above, which are not better or worse, more or less correct than one another. One potential answer is simple. The sound of one hand clapping is none. It is silence. The question that remains is, can you hear it? Thank you for listening to the Philosophical Bachelor.